This week on the Christmas edition of Under the Radar, it is the season to be offended. And what a better way to kick off this offensive season with a little teabagging courtesy of Poundland. So Poundland, as the name suggests, is a UK discount store, and they thought that they would spice up their Christmas advertising campaign this year with a few risque tweets. And one tweet in particular set off the perpetually offended brigade. Connie Nolan, a self-described feisty woman from Kent, was so outraged she tweeted this out to the police. This tweet is unacceptable and appears to legitimate violence against women. Poundland have confirmed it is their tweet, so could you please explain the law on inciting violence to them? Well, I think they could start with explaining it to you. But can you imagine what it's like to be that self-absorbed, to think that because you find something unacceptable and because you've interpreted it as promoting violence against women, that the police should step in? And the best part is, she tweeted to the wrong police department. Connie, we're in the United States. You might want to seek someone local. And while you're at it, Connie, why don't you change your Twitter handle to Fragile Woman? Poundland's aggressive, hypersexualized elf ad campaign has ruined Christmas, objectifying women and insinuating sex acts. The character depicted on the shop's social media is offending customers. Now, I thought this was an Onion-type article, but it's actually serious. And given this headline, you'd think that Connie, the Fragile Woman, was representative of those that saw the tweet. But just scroll through the Facebook page and Twitter and you'll see just as many people, if not more, thought it was just a bit of fun, including many, many women. Now, because the original tweet included Twinings tea, Twinings, of course, sought to remove themselves from this non-controversy, tweeting out some corporate speak. We are aware of an image that is circulating that misuses our product. This is to confirm that we had no involvement in this and that it is obviously not reflective of our brand values. Well, I'm sorry, Twinings, but who are you to say how your product will be used after it has been purchased? Anyway, obviously no teabaggers at Twinings, but probably the best part of this whole saga is that Poundland just keeps doubling down, tweeting out the image a second time with the title Spot the Difference. And as I said earlier, this is just one of a number of these Christmas-themed tweets from Poundland. I think this one is my personal favourite. Now, every single one of these tweets got at least 7,000 likes, and an overwhelming majority of comments are positive. And here's what Poundland's marketing director had to say when questioned by the Triggerati. The love on Facebook has been overwhelming, and that's because it connects with our shoppers. We're proud of a campaign that's only cost £25.53 and is being touted as the winning marketing campaign this Christmas. And that says it all, really. Don't apologise, don't back down, and watch how quickly the Triggerati melt like the snowflakes that they are. Now, across the pond, the process of self-flagellation on the altar of toxic masculinity continues. Harvard student publicly confesses to discussing attractiveness of women. A Harvard student recently made a bold declaration, admitting that, while at a bar with friends one time, he talked about the attractiveness of the women in his class. Daniel Hanrahan, a master's student in public policy at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, wrote in the Harvard Crimson this week that the Harvard community is responsible for sexual assault. Hanrahan notes that while the men who sexually assault women are ultimately the ones responsible for their crimes, we should also not ignore the behaviour of people not directly involved in sexual assaults. It's up to bystanders, Hanrahan writes, to help put an end to sexual assault culture. So let's hear about this harrowing tale. During orientation week in August of 2016, I was out late drinking in Harvard Square with two classmates. The topic switched to the women in our class. Over the drunken hum of the bar's collective conversation, one guy proposed the hottest girls in our class. The other did the same. They both then asked me to rank the girls in our cohort in the order I wanted to get with. My alarmed heart bolted, blood to my cheeks. I crossed my arms, unable to speak. "Are we making you uncomfortable?" one asked me. I cannot remember my exact response, but it was not, yes, objectifying women, even though it seems harmless to you, demeans them and creates an environment that makes sexual assault more likely. Instead, I uncrossed my arms, I shook my head, and yes, I discussed which girls were hot. Oh, the humanity. And so the stunning and brave Hanrahan, some 16 months later, and after the sexual panic of 2017, now decides to speak out about his despicable behaviour. Interesting timing. Well, I suspect that Hanrahan is engaging in a bit of virtue signalling here, but we should be open to the possibility that he genuinely feels this way, that the culture of male shaming has worked its way into the minds of emasculated males like Hanrahan. And just on a side note, as far as I can tell, Hanrahan is actually an Australian student from the University of Melbourne who's on a scholarship to Harvard. So unless there's more than one Daniel Hanrahan enrolled in a Master of Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government, my condolences to Americans for having to bear the self-flagellation of this Australian beta male. Now, who best to expose the insanity around this neo-Puritanism than Tucker Carlson?
In a recent piece for the Harvard Crimson, which is a school newspaper but considers itself so much more, graduate student Daniel Hanrahan reproached himself for what is now a sinister crime. He discussed the attractiveness of the opposite sex. Hanrahan says he was out drinking during the orientation for his class last year when his fellow students raised the matter of which girls in their class were, quote, the hottest. With horror, Hanrahan says he failed to object, to declare that calling women pretty is a form of objectification that could lead to assault. Instead, he says, and I'm quoting, I uncrossed my arms, and yes, I discussed which girls were hot. Apparently, Cambridge is no better than a Boko Haram camp. Kathy Rue, founding publisher of Catalina Magazine, she joins us tonight. Kathy, you are our Sherpa, you're our Tenzing Norgay, our spirit guide into the brave new world of progressive America, into the cultural revolution that's taking place. I didn't know, so thank you for that. I didn't know that this was a crime now.
Well, I mean, it's objectifying women, so that's always been a crime, to objectify women, not seeing them as intelligent creatures, intelligent people that they are, but to see them at Harvard as just hot, I mean, that's not right.
Now, I'm fairly certain objectifying women, if we must use this ridiculous phrase, is not a crime, except in the eyes of the perpetually offended. But I don't want to speak too soon. I'm sure the folks back in Nottinghamshire are mulling this one over for possible inclusion in the hate crime category of misogyny.
Well, how about if a woman is intelligent? Not all people are intelligent, by the way. Some are, some aren't. Same with men, right?
Right.
But is it okay to acknowledge that you find someone attractive, or is that, as Mr. Hanrahan suggests, a form of assault?
Well, he felt that it was wrong because they had a group of guys sitting around and they weren't talking about how intelligent and wonderful these women are. They were talking about their physical attributes and that they were ranking them on a scale of 1 to 10 according to how hot they were. And he felt it was wrong. He felt that he was objectifying women, and he felt that he was creating and helping a culture of rape, he said, on the campus of Harvard. So.
But they weren't raping people, were they? Weren't they just saying which girls they found attractive?
They have a high incidence of rape. They have a high incidence of objectifying women, and 30% of women graduate from Harvard saying that they're victims of sexual assault.
Right, but
so
okay.
it is a problem at Harvard. There is a problem.
I don't know where you got those stats, but I mean, in this specific case, these men weren't planning to go out and assault anybody. Weren't they just saying, like, I find this girl attractive? Do you?
Well, we don't know what these men did.
Right?
We don't know what they did, but we do know that men were behaving badly and are behaving badly at campuses around the country. And now we find out that at Harvard, these guys are speaking inappropriately about women.
Don't you love how some women have the arrogance to think that they get to decide how men can and can't talk about them, even when there are no women around, as though their opinion is actually relevant? I think something should be said about this ridiculous notion of objectification, the idea that men are judging women based purely on their physical appearance. The vast majority of men grow up with mothers, grandmothers, aunts, sometimes sisters. They have girlfriends and wives. Some have daughters and granddaughters, and they work with women in all kinds of contexts and professional capacities. The idea that just because a conversation revolves around attractiveness doesn't mean these other attributes are completely disregarded. And remember, this horrific incident happened during orientation week when these guys probably knew very little about their female classmates except for the way they looked. They hadn't had time to get to know them in any other capacity. Looks was all they had to go on. As I said earlier, it comes down to women wanting to control how they are judged and what can be said about them. You're only allowed to say the things about me that I want you to say and that I approve of. Well, thankfully, you don't get to do that. Just as men can't stop you from judging them based on how tall they are or how much money they have.
And that
saying
is
which ones they find attractive. So is this a transferable crime? I mean, if a bunch of women are sitting around and they say, you know, I think that guy's kind of attractive, or I think he's hot, or whatever.
Women are not the ones. They're not the ones committing the rapes.
So they're allowed to say that?
Well, women aren't harming anyone. So sure, if women aren't harming anyone, that there is no problem that women do this. But if men are actually harming women, which we know they are, then yeah, that is a problem.
So because some men harm, I'm just trying to get the standards here, as I always do when you come on. Just trying to figure out the new rules.
All right,
America's, very different from what it was last week. So because some men harm women. Because some men harm women, no men are allowed to say they find any woman attractive. But because no women harm men, all women are allowed to say they find men attractive. Is that the rule?
It's very rare for men to be objectified and go through experiences like sexual assault. That's just a fact.
And there you have it. You can feed a feminist logic, but you can't make them think. Tucker tries to point out a double standard, and the answer is even dumber than the initial claim. All men are guilty because some minority of men assault women, and therefore they can't talk about female attractiveness. But women can say anything they want because no woman ever does any harm to anyone. So much ignorance in such a short space of time. It's rare for women to objectify men. Really? Women invariably have higher standards of men's physical appearance than vice versa, according to online dating sites such as Tinder and OkCupid. And women don't do harm to men. So the cascade of false allegations of sexual assault resulting in a wave of lawsuits against universities doesn't do any harm to men. The seemingly growing trend of female teachers sleeping with teenage students doesn't do any harm. Okay then. I didn't think this needed to be said, but perhaps it does to a generation of younger men who've been brought up to be ashamed of their masculinity. It's perfectly normal and healthy to find women physically attractive and to talk about it with your mates. And plenty of women want you to find them physically attractive. Again, the hypocrisy of some women is so thick you couldn't cut it with a chainsaw. I'm going to make myself look as physically attractive as possible, but you're not allowed to judge me in that way or even mention it. The irony of these types of hyper-hysterical female offence-taking is that calls for men to be more respectful of women will be met with the exact opposite. How can these women demand respect whilst acting like emotional children? Respect is earned and not automatically given. And it's reciprocal, something that some women seem to have forgotten. Merry Christmas.